right, I think that means we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another BetaKit Live. I am Douglas Soltys, editor-in-chief of BetaKit, and today we are talking about the future of work. So the future has arrived early for Canadian businesses as hybrid work shifted from a COVID-19 emergency response to a permanent reality. I got some data here, some stats I want to hit you with to set the scene up off the top. Some 65% of Canadian knowledge workers now work in a remote or hybrid format, and I think we could all agree that that number might even be a little bit lower than you might have expected. And while employees across the country have embraced remote and hybrid work options, it hasn't actually been a smooth transition. Other data that we have shows that while the vast majority, almost 90% of Canadians are keen on the idea of hybrid work, fewer than 1/4 of them, 22%, say that they are thriving in a hybrid environment. Business leaders are also left grappling with a variety of new challenges when it comes to privacy and security, IT overload, shifting work culture, emerging costs, live streaming perhaps. But it's unlikely that hybrid work is going to go away anytime soon. So what are businesses to do? That's what we're going to be talking about today. While I run my own business that is hybrid and remote, I am very happy to be surrounded by a series of experts, some who are with us in studio and broadcasting remotely, which I think you can see on the screen right now, which just, wasn't something that we did intentionally, but just underscores the importance of this conversation because it's the world that we live in today. So let me introduce our panelists and then we can get into the conversation. Actually, before I introduce our panelists, I'm going to note something to you because you're probably seeing this on one of many different social platforms. It could be LinkedIn, it could be Twitter, it could be X, if you want to call it that. It could be Facebook. You could be watching this on the VOD. If you're watching this live, we want to encourage you to engage. Leave a comment, question, panelists will try to answer it live. I will make sure to tee that up. If, unfortunately, you are seeing this in the future, which is now my past, and this is a recorded conversation, don't worry. Still have that comment. We're going to post the whole thing in a wrap-up on betakit.com, and we'll make sure that our panelists get that question answered for you. But now, I should probably introduce the panelists. Starting first with Denis Gaudreault, who is the country manager for Intel Canada. We have Michael Almeida, the business unit leader for Soft Choice. We're the gents in the room. And then John Trougakos, who you can see right now, a professor at the University of Toronto, who we also just interviewed on BetaKit about this subject in a very thoughtful article that we'll link to in that wrap-up. And we're going to be using, honestly, there's a little bit of a prompt for this. Shout out just everyone, whatever platform you're watching this on, if there are thumbs up emojis, if there are hearts in the chat, the reason why John is joining us remotely is because he just had a baby and he was willing and able to negotiate a little bit of remote connectivity for this conversation, even though he couldn't be in person. We sincerely appreciate his commitment to this conversation. And if you feel that way, just smash whatever engagement button the platform of your choice allows you to engage with. Okay, let's get this conversation started. And I think, when we were doing our prep call, one thing kind of emerged is this idea of shifting responsibilities. It is easy to say that hybrid and remote work have changed work, but that doesn't really mean much until we understand and unpack how. From the prep call, it seemed like everyone on this panel, the perspective was the dynamic between the employer and the employee, if not having fundamentally shifted, some of the expectations on either side of who provides what, who's responsible for what is acceptable in 2023 has fundamentally changed. And, Denis, I think I want to start with you because you are... we're giving John his flowers for this, but you actually flew in for this for this conversation, right? Yeah, to be here in studio. But you've also been, as I understand it, a remote hybrid worker for most of your career. One of the things that stood out to me when you were discussing this, and I think it's maybe grounded upon your personal experience, but just your experience at Intel Canada, is that there are just certain things that maybe right now organizations are concerned about or expected to provide that it's just really difficult for them to provide on behalf of the employee. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to some of that either from your career or people that you manage or even maybe new employees that you see coming up through the organization.
Yeah, so when we had the thanks for having me first. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for
Super
being here.
happy to have the discussion. So, like you mentioned, right? So pretty much my entire career at Intel, I've been done remotely or hybrid mode, right? So based in Montreal and manage the team across Canada, always been working remotely. So and there's few things that I guess I find out slowly, because I would say it took me almost 10 years to figure that out. So because I just had two role in 10 years at Intel. So before I really cracked the code of working remotely, right? And there's a few things. So first one I would say is how you manage your network, right? So because when you're in an office all day, the way you connect with your peers, with your managers, or even with your customer, the outside world, is completely different than we're working remotely or in hybrid mode, right? And the other one is how you manage your career, which is completely different and when you're working on hybrid or remotely. So you have to be way more proactive. The organization or your manager will be there to support you, but you need to be to do a better job and be more proactive. I can share, if we have time, more details, but you really have to change the way you manage your career.
Yeah.
And you can definitely have a great career even working remotely. So that's not an issue at all.
No, let's dig on that right now, because again, for me, I was talking about, like, with BetaKit, we literally, the day code started, we immediately became a remote company, and the co-working space that we were working out of did not exist as a co-working space by the time that year was up. But I similar to you, I have an experience when I worked at Research in Motion BlackBerry. I was living in Ottawa. My team was based in Kitchener-Waterloo, and I had the option of commuting to Canada, the Ottawa suburbs. Shout out to Canada for anyone watching from there, or working from home. And I chose working from home because I saw no value in a long commute to sit beside colleagues who I didn't work with on a day-to-day, when the people that I actually needed to connect with were hours and miles away. That eventually resulted in me moving to Toronto to be a little bit closer to home office, having a regular commute in office, and really those people that I wanted to be closer to, I kind of they were a consideration in me changing my life a bit to get closer to the people that were providing me mentorship, leadership. The VP that hired me, the manager that hired me and brought me in, completely changed my growth trajectory, my career. I don't know if I would be saying that if I still stayed in Ottawa and I was working entirely remote. So, like, when you're talking about managing your network, managing your career, we're not talking about like some sort of contractual obligation here, right? We're more talking about the organic things that happen between managers, employees, leaders that kind of set you on your course.
It's really more have an intent, and when you're doing your networking, because basically when you're at the office, you'll see a lot of people in the hallway, at the water cooler, and you can easy to build your network, and that you're exposed to a lot of people. But working remotely, so very often you don't have that chance, right? So basically what I found is when you do a map of all your network and the people that you should be interacting with, whether it's your peers or up or out, so there are customers, partners. So it's really on an intent really to reach to them. So quite often that you keep that momentum and that connection with them. So really you're having those connections on a purpose, because if you just wait that you have a call, you won't have a chance to have chit chat with them or anything. It's really to build that network with an intent and actively plan for that network. So that really make a difference for me in my career. And that's what because Intel as an organization, we have been hybrid for years, even before COVID, right? So, and that's something that we're coaching and helping people to really have that mentality and to do that. Kind of the same thing with your career, right? It's more be proactive in building your career. So deciding, say, this are the options maybe I'm looking to do, right? As my career is evolving. Or if you don't know exactly what you want to do next, at least those are the skills that I would like to develop. And what I found is going around my network, or maybe I call it my tribe, like people who are coaching you, mentoring you, go around with them, again, being remotely and hybrid, going around and asking for feedback. Do you believe for this role, this is what I need? Do you believe I have those skills or those experience? No, you should, you need this for that role. You should be talking with that person. He will tell you what you need.
Yep.
Again, you reinforce the connections and they tell you what you need, and you're building all the skills and everything you need for your next role. And when the role open up, so you're kind of an obvious candidate because you have been going around and advocating yourself and building yourself, right?
Yeah, you kind of got to stay top of mind. It's interesting because you're identifying things that have generally been considered organic, or you might recognize in retrospect, and now you have to be explicit and proactive with. I don't know if I would have been prepared for that as a new employee in a corporate environment, a startup environment. I know we're gonna teasing for maybe some of the stats that John can provide here, talking about the productivity benefits between hybrid or remote. I think there's an impact on young people here, but there is this consideration where you're not just going to stand out at the team lunch one week or stay top of mind. You're going to have to work to be top of mind. On the other side, let's talk about maybe I don't think these are necessarily new expectations when we talk about like what a business is set to provide, but the fact that you have hybrid and remote environments means the logistics of getting the team together is very different. This was something that I was not familiar with, but I think, Michael, you had brought this up on the prep call. Like, there are some, very sincere, good faith arguments on either side when you talk about financially, environmentally, the impact of in-office versus remote. I want to make sure we get to that. But you guys were even just talking about something, and maybe I've just been, like when we went fully remote, I purchased every single piece of tech I could for my home office. So I don't even think, I've got I got the video game chair, I got the extra monitors. But for people that are looking to still come in the office, or they're now office hoteling, they don't have a dedicated space. And this idea of, and it's funny again, because I worked at BlackBerry, bring your own smartphone. BYOD, bring your own device, was a big thing. But now we're talking about like bring your own keyboard. So now we're in the situation where you used to have a cubicle, you used to have a place where you showed up, your business would provide everything for you. And now you, as an employee, in some ways need to kind of manage like almost like a restaurant booking where you're going to be that day, but then you also have to bring your own bottle of wine and something, like, to continue the analogy, the metaphor a little bit. Is that, in some ways that's extra expectations on the employee, but like the business also has to create a system to set that up and manage it. And I'm wondering if you feel how much that plays into how much businesses are pushing for a return to in-office, or maybe, locking in some expectations because the flexibility is difficult to plan for in the way that Denis was speaking to.
It is very, very much difficult. And first off, thank you for the invitation and being part of this great panel with my co-host. And I think one of the things that I always think about is the 4 C's and an impact that this has on the employer and employee. When I talk about the 4 C's, it's about communication, collaboration, creativity, and the commute.
Okay.
And it gets to the point about bring your own device or bring your own keyboard. An employee in hybrid work has less and less worries about the commute.
Yeah.
They're more focused on other things. So they're less worried. They're more productive from a time span. If you're in Toronto or Montreal, an hour and a half to get to the office, and equal amount of time back is consuming. Consuming physically, but also financially. Just the amount of gas, the parking, the wear and tear on the vehicle, and the sustainable part that also impacts by not having to commute every single day. So the employee is less concerned about the commute, and the employer has to shift to be more mindful of the technology that they're providing the employees to be creative and to generate great ideas so that the company can increase productivity, increase revenue, increase all of the outcomes that they want to generate. And companies need to be mindful of that. And it could be as simple. I always keep thinking about the challenges a lot of customers face with meeting room solutions and how to configure a meeting room. Pre-COVID, you might have a meeting with 7 or 8 people in the meeting room, 1 person remote. And we went from a stage where everybody was remote during those meetings. Today, we might have half of the team or the audience in the meeting room and the other half dialed in remote. And how does the technology allow and embrace the creativity element of that meeting.
Yeah, as a guy that runs a meeting through a whiteboard, that's a true, like, I don't know if I necessarily look fondly upon my commute, although the change of state I kind of sometimes do, but that it's almost like I have phantom limb reaching for the whiteboard marker to kind of lead that stuff. John, we're talking about a lot of different things here. I want to get you in, given that you are remote, we could talk about the tech stack that we're using to bring you into this broadcast and then send it out to everyone on the internet. But I'm going to give you free reign to jump in on any things that we're talking about, whether it's like any of the 4 C's with the communication, the commute stuff, or even just what Denis was speaking to in terms of like the new burden on employees to plan. Because I know we're going to talk a little bit later on about expectations of performance in these different states. I'm assuming these are some of the things that are contributing to this, right? What resonates most to you from what we've discussed so far?
Yeah, I think a few things. I think there is a shift here. One thing that organizations and employees need to keep in mind is that this is still early days of figuring out how to do this and do this well. Organizations that can do this well and transition well to this will be able to build work models that will best suit the needs of their corporate goals, but also the needs of their employees. And that's kind of the best of both worlds, but we're not quite there yet in a lot of cases. The key is to have a planful hybrid approach so that you don't just kind of have, kind of making it up as you go along as an organization. Employees do want some kind of structure, some kind of framework and expectations. I think really we do see benefits when we do talk about the employee specifically in terms of their commute, in terms of being able to work with autonomy, which is such a critical element to employee productivity and well-being. I think on the other side of the coin, though, there are challenges, especially for the demographic that is in the younger and earlier career phase, where they don't have their networks established. They don't have the connections that they need. Even simple things, in terms of who do they go to troubleshoot things in the organization, they don't have established. And that can be a problem for not just new employees, but also not just young employees, but also new employees in organizations. So employees that maybe are experienced, but are joining an organization new. And so what kind of onboarding are they getting? And that's something that, again, it's a partnership between the employee and the organization. And part of this planful hybrid is that organizations have to account for these things and be able to create environments that do provide opportunities for new employees and younger employees to develop their professional networks. But also, it is up to the employees in a lot of ways, too, to be able to develop their networks. That being said, even in person, fully in-person offices, some employees are better at doing this than others, and they're learning how to do it, and they have to learn how to do it successfully.
Yeah, that's the new employee dynamic. I'm glad that you brought that up because we've got a pretty young and small team at BetaKit, and I'm maybe more aligned to thinking of like what it was like for myself in that circumstance, how I would engage with it. But if you're a new employee, either joining a large organization with a pretty significant and pre-established culture, I think we can all think of the large companies who have that, or if you're joining maybe a smaller company that doesn't have a predefined culture, it can be, even if you're a very experienced worker, it can be very hard for you to onboard into that if your window for that is still the screen. I guess I'm wondering, are we okay with these new expectations or burdens on employees? Like, Michael, to your point, I think for most experienced workers, the ability to self-manage, to have more time, I've got people on my team where they're able to like step out, pick up their kids, work offset hours. That's a real benefit to them, but they're, 10 years into their career, net new. Do we have to, I guess maybe how should we be looking towards John's point in terms of building plans and planning for this? How should we be breaking this down by different plans for net new employees, different plans or engagements for younger employees? Does it depend upon maybe circumstance here? Like how would you guys see it?
Well, I think to Denis' point about career development, I think organizations today need to be a lot more mindful of this in the hybrid work model. And a lot of it has been given up, the water cooler conversation or the hallway conversation or the lunch meeting. And companies have to overreach and develop, career development plans where the onus is taken significantly away from the employee. They still co-author and co-own it. But I think the employer has to be more of a facilitator and be more mindful of saying, how do we grow this individual's career and get them in touch with the people that where his next career will lead him to, that can provide him coaching and mentoring and guidance on what the future state looks like. It's a lot more work.
Yeah,
but
it is.
It needs to be done if we're going to continue this.
And to the point, I think we're going to there's a tension here as well with the talent war and retention component of this, right? Because, you could be putting a lot of work into what you see as a new young or emergent resource, and they just see the company that they work for as a different Teams, Slack, email instance, right? Like it's not something that they're not emotionally connecting to the culture of the business because they haven't engaged with it. Denis, you wanted to jump in on this, but I'm wondering if you can expand on this as well. Was there anything that at Intel had been done that you really appreciated, maybe that you weren't like that you would wish had been done sooner, or that over time you would want anyone who is having a career path similar to yours would want to take on, or things that you maybe learned along the way that be looking to parse to other employees? I want to if we can accelerate this and kind of bring it to a point where your work history is something that gets carried forward. I want those pro tips, I guess.
So like I say, it took me 10 years to figure things out because I was doing what I learned, I would say, working at an office, right? And obviously for me it was not working because, like I said, so for 10 years I just had 2 roles, and the reality I applied to 14 roles and I got none of them. So obviously I was not working, like I was not doing the right thing. So I stepped back and I kind of tried to study a little bit. I need to figure things out because I'm working hard and it's not working, right? And one thing that I found that was already used at Intel was a tool that we call like a one-pager. Basically like a simple PowerPoint, what show with picture who I am, right? Family, my hobby and stuff like that, and can describe me as a person. I have any kids or what I do when I'm not working. And we're kind of using that quite often when we were face-to-face. Hey, this is who I am, everything. But one thing I found is when you're working remotely, it's kind of hard to build that human connections that you get when you meet face to face and you're having a lunch with someone and say, oh, I see that you like hockey or you like reading books and stuff like that, right? You get those at water cooler. So because you don't have time, you're on a call, you're like, things go super fast, right? So what I found is every time internally when I'm talking with my colleague for the first time, first thing I'm going to do, show up my one-pager, spend like 1-2 minutes. Hey, this is who I am. Not need to go to the whole story. They can see the picture. They can read the whole thing. And I'm telling you, 99% of the time, people will pick something. Hey, I didn't know you like this. So, and the connection is like that. So we're human and build that bond. To me, really help us. And we're like at Intel Canada, we're pushing everybody to use that, like working remotely, because you build that human connection and you build that bond that you get when you're face-to-face that you don't when you're remotely. So that was an awesome tool, honestly.
I love that because that turns you from just someone like an email address in the global address list to a coworker and a colleague. We do something now. Again, I love how I'm like, I've got all these experts here. So I'm like, here's what we do at BetaKit. We're less than 10 people, but we do something where we'll have we call it BetaKit Masterclass for the weekly team meeting. New employees, they're kind of, it's like Fight Club. If it's your first time, you got to kind of do it. And they'll present a masterclass, a presentation, either on themselves or something that they care about or are passionate or interested in. And they're very, very goofy. We've I did my top 5 Raptors players of all time. We had a returning employee just last week do, she lives in Squamish now. So it's like things that you need to know about Squamish, just stuff that like, again, creates that personal connection. I think that's really, really awesome and impactful. Let's do it in the counter way, right? Where if you don't have these policies and practices that are allowing employees to have those kind of personal connections, because there is still we talked a little bit about the communication software we're referencing here as we have, remote guests dialing in. There's the IT component of this that because of remote and hybrid environments are maybe, they have to work harder to not turn these employees into just a binary ones and zeros. But like IT has to find a balance now between, are these employees actually managing their time very well, or are they distracted? And how much data should we be using to track that? How easy do we make it for them to connect? What tools do we use? There are different security concerns now. So are we actually locking down their workspace rather than, things that would have been fine in the office are no longer fine when you have like endless touch points wherever you bring your device. Considerations like that. Like I want to now, knowing that like Intel has a vPro product that I'm sure would help most businesses kind of manage some of this stuff. Like we can get as technical, I think, as this group wants to, but I'm wondering if we can identify maybe some policy considerations or best practice considerations when it comes to that. Because I've worked at the office that suffers in fear of the IT admin who decided the right way for everyone to work, right. And I've worked in places where it is pure chaos on the other side, and these are happening in organizations and teams, actually specific within organizations of all sizes. How do we kind of find the balance between what the company needs to meet these new expectations of management versus maybe what else they can do that might not rub the right way with these employees? And maybe Mike, I'll go with you first on this, and I don't know if you want to talk best practice, policy, or if we want to actually talk about like tech standards or implementation there. I'm happy to go wherever you want to take it, sir.
Well, I read John's article on technology and processes, and I think the solution lies within the two, right? Having the right amount, the right technology, and the right policies or processes that empower employees to create great outcomes. I think that's paramount in anything you do, whether you're in the office or you're working from Starbucks or any other location around the world. I think that becomes incredibly important. And the technology should be there to support the employer and the employee's needs. And IT is struggling with balancing all of this. They're trying to keep the fence up in security threats. They're trying to, create strategic plans.
Cybersecurity threats, by the way, which are up 600% since the start of the pandemic. If we just want to connect some threads here, 100%.
Yeah, 100%. Implementing strategic plans while keeping the lights on, making sure that end users are supported when they have a challenge connecting to a meeting or they have a challenge with an application. All of those things need to be accounted for by an IT professional or an IT group. And that's where solutions can help, and understanding where organizations want to go, not only based on technology needs, but also on cultural needs. What is the culture? What is the needs of the organization beyond the outcome, beyond the technology? It's also about satisfying that human connection and the cultural needs of a company.
Okay. I love that at every point we're grounding the human employee component of this, because it's really tough to talk about future of work and not mention that. John, Michael gave you a shout out on your writing, so I feel like we should probably bring you in next and see, I threw kind of a bindle of different items at you. Which one is resonating most when it comes to the issues of management or policy from the tech perspective, and kind of laying like a future workplace that can include wherever the employees are that day?
Sure. A couple of things. One, first of all, to kind of wrap up a bit of the other conversation that leads into this, hybrid should be the best of both worlds, right? It should be in person and also the remote element. Now, to make that work, you obviously need the technology to have that transition between the two domains be as smooth as possible. I think, companies worry about the upfront cost here. But when things like the personal computer became a thing, when things like laptops became a thing, when smart devices became a thing, there was an investment in that. There's been an investment in that technology. We wouldn't be able to have this conversation if that investment back then didn't happen. And so what we're seeing now is the next iteration of those investments that are coming through, and the next iteration of those technologies that are going to allow us to work better, work more effectively, and work more productively. But in order for those technologies, whatever the technology is, it's got to be supported by the culture of the organization and the policies of the organization and the leadership of the organization. So, when we have smartphones, some companies use those very effectively. Some companies use them terribly, right? People's lives were tethered to the job 24/7. They were burnt out. It was miserable. And they're getting messages at 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, midnight, and not really being their most productive. And the company wasn't really seeing their objectives met. Same thing here. What are the technologies that are going to be key? Obviously, the transition between home and office is important. The meeting technology, which we've touched on earlier, is really important to get that right, making those investments, having people learn how to do it effectively. And also the security issue. There's probably a lot of reasons going on in the world right now why we're seeing different kind of security issues pop up. But needless to say, it's something we have to deal with as organizations. And so, again, the challenges we face, if the organizations and the technologies we have look to meet those challenges, will only improve and get better. And I think just saying, oh, because this doesn't work perfectly, throw it out. That's never been the approach for successful organizations. It's, this doesn't work perfectly. How can we meet this challenge to make it something that's going to work for us? And again, that's at the technological level, but the people level as well.
Okay. I think that's probably, again, tied to the people thing. I want to stick with you, John, just for a minute, just to set some of the stats here, because this actually didn't come up yet so far, but we talked about a lot on the pre-call. Like, the argument here is that, like, with hybrid or work, employees haven't really missed a beat. They're managing their time more effectively. But we've got some data that shows the productivity component measurement here is not quite that. And I think, John, you were saying that basically the current knowledge is that hybrid workers are slightly more productive right now and remote not as productive. Do you want to double click on that for us?
Sure. Yeah. I think when we started right off early in the pandemic, we actually saw people get pretty productive for the situation they were in. But of course, for a lot of places that were in lockdowns or had a lot of fears to kind of interact with others and fears for the economy and their jobs, quite frankly, that wasn't surprising that people spent a lot of time working and got productive, but it wasn't sustainable, right? And so over time, we saw the remote in many jobs, not all, because I don't want to generalize everything, but by and large, if we look back at it now, kind of where remote work is now compared to before, it's a bit of a decrease in productivity compared to in-office or hybrid. But actually, there's some pretty good data coming out of places like Stanford and Harvard and even University of Toronto, where we do see slight increases for hybrid workers in terms of performance and productivity compared to even full-time in-office workers. And some of those estimates, range from, 2 to 3% up to like 6-7%, let's say. And so that's not insignificant. That's not nothing. And I think as we get better at doing hybrid, I think as we get better at figuring out what works and what doesn't work, we'll see by and large that there will be benefits there. The other thing to keep in mind is that, we see some studies where companies are seeing decreased quit rates because of having a good, effective hybrid plan in there. We're seeing employee satisfaction sometimes. I know we sometimes see the negative, but a lot of times that's the thing to keep in mind is that there's a change process here, and people don't like change. It can be stressful. And because so many organizations still don't have adequate support for their hybrid models and planning for their hybrid models going into the future, it does make it more challenging sometimes for employees in certain ways. So I think as we kind of develop these plans going forward, normalize things, and the technology continues to catch up, we'll see that these more recent studies showing that hybrid does have kind of this productivity edge are going to be strengthened as we go along.
Gotcha. Okay. So, Michael, just noting that I think that what you were saying in terms of some of the benefits or the employee ask is showing up in the data. Denis, I want to go to you in terms of because Intel's a big company, and we acknowledge that there's just been this crazy period of whether you're quiet quitting or the great whatever, very transformative time. Does it stand out to you that some of this stuff is actually not just a thing to enable current employees, but a potential retention tool or attraction tool?
No, it is, absolutely. So because when you look, for us, always been like where we get the best talent, right? So and sometimes the best talent you can get is not really at the location that you would like to have that talent. I'm not talking about an employee working in one of our factory, but let's say a developer or designer of microchip or something. So that talent can be in a different country or different cities within that country. So by being able now with the hybrid work, so we're fully remote, right? So we're able to tap in a new pool of talent that before maybe we'll say, I'm not moving to the West Coast in Portland, or I'm not moving here on the East Coast. Yeah. So now we can get not just access to more talent, but be able to retain that talent, right? So we have seen absolutely a little bit better number, I would say, on the number of people, like the retention rate, right? So,
yeah, like a true future of work conversation should acknowledge that there are, particularly in Canada, when we're looking at like 30 to 40,000 tech workers who are like need to be hired today, that not looking purely in the municipalities is a major consideration. But I'm wondering, like, maybe Michael, how much do you feel that is, whether or not that would have been the case if we all decided to embrace hybrid in 2019, or is now just a reflection of the fact that post-COVID people have had their lives change in so many different ways that you can't roll back to that, because there were people that changed their work circumstances over the last couple of years and they're just unwilling to kind of go back to the pre-environment. So they're going to be hiring they're going to be staying with the companies that are building this not as just, again, emergency reaction, but go forward.
I'm a personal believer that COVID accelerated what was naturally going to happen. Hybrid work was well, thought of and well designed. I've been working 1 day a week before the pandemic remote. And so that was my existence for the last 20 years.
It's a little Friday, you get a brunch, you take some meetings,
actually,
get on the patio.
It was actually Thursdays.
Okay,
Thursdays was usually my work remote day. And COVID just naturally accelerated this. And it made, IT groups and people adapt very quickly. They didn't have a choice. Fast forward to today, and to build on John's point, there's a bit of loss of productivity, but I think it's equally important to measure people's well-being. Today I read about people and talk to people and team members, what's their daily routine? And I hear people talk more about the quality of the food that they eat at home. They're not eating processed food as much or eating out as much.
For me, that was always a plus.
Yeah,
Yeah, I understand.
depending on what you're eating, and also on physical activity. A lot of people, instead of spending the hour and a half commuting, they could go for a walk. They could go for a run. They could go to do those things that improve their quality of life. So perhaps productivity is down a little bit with people working remote, and hybrid and technology and processes will improve that. But I think we can't measure the quality in people's lives and an improvement. Now, that's a general statement because there's going to be people that need to be in the office and need the social and the human connection. That's very, very important to human beings, and more important for some people than others. Being mindful of that. But there's also massive gains to be realized from a proper hybrid work model.
Yeah. Okay, I want to maybe stay on this just for a little bit, and did you get your thought? Because it feels like it's the inverse of what we were talking about before in terms of, there's individual responsibilities now placed upon the employees to kind of manage their career, and I think we're acknowledging some potential productivity gains or a net equilibrium, allowing a greater degree of lifestyle options. Should we be breaking down these kind of numbers almost by cohort of like what individuals at the company like differing needs? Because especially for employees that have families, every work circumstance is very, very different, and the people that might be benefit from staying at home might also be going absolutely insane if they're staying at home. Like the different considerations. Could you, I guess maybe, is there room to optimize here if we start maybe building parallel plans for not workers based upon seniority or department, but like home or hybrid work circumstance that they fall in, like ways to optimize for people who, maybe they're staying home because they have kids, or maybe they need to work off hours, or maybe they're very, very remote for meetings. Like, is it possible for a business to kind of derive that breadth of policy for different employee needs, or is that where this gets too messy and it leads to that pushing back to no, everybody back in the office, orthodoxy kind of thing?
I can share from Intel point of view what we did, right? So for sure, we defined some specific role that you need to be on site. Like I said, so we're a manufacturing company, right? So there's role, whether it's within the labs or within the factory, that you need to be there, right?
Yeah.
So no question there.
Can't do lab work at home. That's very dangerous.
Yeah.
Don't do lab work at home.
And for any other role, right? So whether you're a developer or a designer or someone in sales or marketing, so any role that can be done remote or hybrid. So what we just say, we're going to be an hybrid company, so that's clear, but we'll be up between you and your manager and your team, so that you define so what that means for you working hybrid. Because like you just said, so everybody has personal circumstances that mean I may need you for me Tuesday, Wednesday because of such or such, and for another person maybe I'm good Thursday and Friday, right? Yes. So and when you think what is meaningful for your team to be all together and what makes sense, so we left that to each of the team to decide how they manage that hybrid work environment. So it was not a broad statement across everybody need to be there on Monday and Friday, and you can stay home Tuesday to Thursday.
Because Michael needs his Thursdays, right? Was that easy for Intel to do, given like history, size, circumstance, or was there still a little bit of I don't even know if it's like the actual figuring it out component or just culturally what you were willing to accept. Like, were there conversations internally?
There was conversation inside, right? So we're a large organization with more, like 130,000 people, right? So for sure there was a shift, right? So and because if you're used to have your team that are all developer together and you can whiteboard together, so that's a big change, right? Yeah. So but the thing is, like Rich said, the pandemic can change everything. One thing that we notice is whatever the policy that you put in place, so it's super important that's clearly role model by the management and the leadership, right? So if you say, hey, we don't want people because people start to go crazy and sending email any time of the day, like during the weekend, and you as a manager leader, you're doing that exactly. So that's not good, right? Yeah. So you're not gonna. So we made that super clear, right? So when we define the policy, so that hey, we are kind of representing and making sure that we follow that policy as a leader and manager in the organization, whatever it is, right?
Internal consistency means a lot, right? Yeah. You know, especially if you're telling certain workers, whether they're remote or in cities, like, hey, we really need you to stay in your 500 square foot condo versus like what the leadership, like there are disparities there that became much more obvious during COVID that I think people are still holding to. John, all of this goes to like our third section. We're just kind of like bringing this out in an easy way, which was talking about planning, what the plan is. You said two, I think, very funny things on our pre-call that I want to highlight. One slightly more sad than others. You said you were doing a lot of stuff on remote and hybrid work before the pandemic, but people didn't care as much. I think is a point very, very well taken. But this one was a little bit more scary. You were saying that there are many companies that you either are aware of or do work with who are not necessarily bringing in an actual plan, like a dedicated fulsome plan for remote or hybrid work into 2024. They are I'm assuming still running out the clock on whatever emergency wait and see thing they've still had going for the last 2.5 years. Can you parse that out for us? Because as we close this on, like, we're already talking about it, the kind of policies or flexibility that are needed for certain organizations. The fact that there are businesses without plans and maybe not planning is very scary to me.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, to kind of your first comment, it wasn't just things like remote work or hybrid, but working on alternative work schedules, things like 4-day work weeks, thinking about how what are the most productive and effective times for people to be working, and how are different work methods more effective than others for different people. So I did a lot of work on that, and we do know that there's not a linear relationship between amount of time working and people's actual productivity, right? So that's one thing. So this idea of forcing everyone back into an office because you can see them and they'll be sitting at the desk and they're going to be working, that doesn't mean they're going to be any more productive, right? And we've known that for quite some time. I think on the other issue, there are a number of companies. A couple of things. One, they don't have a kind of unique plan for their organization. They're either trying to take somebody else's plan or just throw something kind of haphazardly together. And, even small companies, right? This can be a problem for mid-sized companies, larger companies. Sometimes we'll try to have something more definitive a lot of times. But the other issue is the communication piece, right? And so sometimes even if companies do have a plan, they're not effectively communicating this to their employees. So people don't know what to expect. And that uncertainty is something that people don't generally deal well with. If you think about it, they've got to make a plan, right? Like if you have kids, you've got to know, do I need daycare? Do I need someone to support on which days? How do I organize my day? If you're caring for an elder or, whatever it might be. So I think this is a point of stress for people when the plans aren't very clear and the plans are not communicated very effectively by the organizations. I've worked with a few companies that have done some pretty innovative things in setting up their plans. And when they go through the exercise of a proper evaluation of what's going to work for them and tailor it to their organization, it seems to work quite well. And we do see that companies have a lot of satisfaction from their workforce. They have a lot of connection in the way they need the connection to happen to be successful. But they can also retain top talent and attract top talent. I think companies that are kind of in this wait and see mode. Some of them I know are just hoping that, well, it's going to just go back to the way it was. But I've used this analogy kind of, for a few years now, and it's like the toothpaste is out of the bottle. You cannot force it all back in there. It's just not going to happen. People know that it can be done differently. They appreciate the flexibility and the autonomy they get with it. But also, organizations, again, why not take advantage of this opportunity to tailor a work plan that's going to work best for your staff, for your people, give them a healthy work-life balance. And I think when it comes down to it and we really look at it, the objective of every organization is to meet their goals, right? To be successful. And this is just another tool that they can utilize to do it. But if you don't have a plan, like with anything, if you don't implement this plan, if you don't base it on the input of your employees, and we say, we want employee engagement, well, go ahead and engage your employees to figure out what's going to work for your organization, because they probably will have a lot of the answers. There's a lot of opportunity there to strengthen the culture of the organization through this process as well.
Yeah. Okay. A lot of things that you touched upon there that I don't know you can see, but the room was very much responding to. So one. Let's just acknowledge that for the companies that don't have a plan, I was just imagining them like listening to what Denis was saying and like being like, oh, that's what Intel does. Let's just scratch off their name and roll that out, which is like, I guess one step above doing nothing, but not necessarily the best. I think it's really interesting, the idea of communication. We were talking about like the whiteboard stuff, scheduling for the meeting room. Those are very specific, regular cadence, team focused things. The all hands, the rollout is very, very different now. And we're also not in an environment where you could trust that you could bring everyone together, do the town hall and lay this out. Denis, is there anything in terms of like how Intel kind of made this shift internally that you feel like resonates with that, or the communication component of that? Because you were talking before about being very thoughtful to finding those flexible bands, but I'm wondering if you just have any thoughts about how this was initially communicated, I guess, in terms of what is going to be done when, and again, that consistency from the executive level down.
So that was, for us, was super clearly communicated from the executive and the communication group. So whether it was internally, also externally, because you can look on the web, just type Intel hybrid work, and you'll see like bunch of stuff, basically that's publicly available, right? So about our policies and how we're rolling out. And so, so it was super clearly, and it was an intent to really clearly articulate that to all employees. So I think that was very well done. So from that point of view, right? Okay. So, but one thing, just one piece on the communication, which is not related to how you communicate that hybrid work and your policy and everything, but more working from an hybrid environment. So the fact that it's super important as an employee that you over communicate, because there's a lot of stuff that when you're at the office, that you're exposed, your manager know what you're working on, so yes. Other people, because you chit chat, and that's not happening when you're working. So as an individual, so it's super important that you over communicate. So you send more communication, you talk with people, you proactively communicate on what you're working, what's going on. So because I found that it's super easy to be isolated, right? And people kind of dig their own hole, and people or don't know what's going on in their world, right?
And we have to be assuming now that these communications are asynchronous, right? So this isn't a broadcast one to many. People might be getting it next day. Like, we're doing this live, and we know we need to have the VOD because this time zone doesn't work for everyone across Canada necessarily, beyond just like the remote considerations. They might have the meeting going on right now. So I think that's hugely important, that not only the increasing the threshold of communication, but then assuming that you're actually not necessarily talking to people real time, how they're going to consume it is really a big deal. There was something, Michael, that John said that stood out when it talked about like, hey, the value of a plan. You had talked about this, that this could actually be an opportunity for businesses to actually engage and not maybe start from scratch, but build something going forward that works for them. He said, this is a matter of identifying a pain point and building a solution to it. I'm assuming you're a pretty big proponent of what John's saying in terms of like not copy pasting what Intel or other leaders are doing, but like scoping to the needs of your individual business, right?
Yeah, like there's nothing wrong with leveraging best practices of other organizations. Like why reinvent things? But there has to be a customization for the needs of that organization and the people within it. And if you go to the employees, they will tell you everything that you need to know. It's very, very simple. They will explain to you what their needs and requirements are, what needs to be fixed. And it's up for us as leaders to listen to that and make those changes so that a proper solution with technology or with process gets implemented, right? I'm a big fan of John's, methodology of technology and process, but you got to understand where the pain points and the obstacles are and balancing them with the needs and requirements of an organization.
Yeah, I'm wondering. I would hope at this point, so many years in, and we kind of alluded to, but didn't really talk about like just how maybe tense the relationship has become between employers and employees in certain instances, and as what was allowed in an emergency environment now becomes the expectation going forward, and then when you try to claw back things for like there could be some tension there. I would assume maybe the fear is mostly coming from the businesses not necessarily wanting to communicate with their employees, but then distilling what they're told into an active plan. I could see that it'd be a little scary, especially if you've created an environment with remote and hybrid now, where there is little uniformity in perspectives along, again, seniority, department, division, because every different person in that department could have a different work circumstance or be communicating differently. I think maybe we're in agreement, right? That, like, the alternative to this, though, is the force everybody back to the office, and that is the toothpaste back in the bottle that John was talking about. Like, there's no expectation from your perspective that this is a viable solution.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
So I agree with John. So the toothpaste is out of the tube, or the genius is out of the bottle, right? So I don't think, I don't think forcing. So first, you're going to lose a lot of people or top talent, right? Yes. So because many people start to work during the pandemic, and that's what they have known, right? Like almost being not even hybrid, fully remote, and they build their life around that model, right? So that's the first thing. And secondly, so like Michael was mentioning, so people realize that, hey, I can do my work, I can be even more efficient doing remotely role. Why you want me back at the office, right? So so I
so
don't
what is that service? What are you telling me about me if you don't trust me? Yeah,
exactly. So I think it's us to adapt the policy and the system.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that really resonates there with what Denis is saying is that there's people can be very productive working from home. We know from the data that heads down work, focused work, is done very well for many people at home, whereas the interpersonal things and the team things that have to happen work well in the office, let's say, right? So there's different benefits to each space, and people having that flexibility to figure out how to do and what works for them better in one space than the other, I think is really important and a good point definitely to keep in mind.
Okay, allow me to follow up on that, because Denis, you were raising your hand because we spoke about Intel kind of being flexible within the team, and we've talked a little bit about businesses not being the same. I'm wondering, do you have best practice recommendations when it comes to how these businesses should be parsing? Should it be by team? Is it by geography? Is it by division? Is there anything that you're seeing that's working very well in terms of how to implement this? Like, I'm interested because I'm always cognizant of us. Me sitting around a bunch of experts who know this stuff or are seeing successes, laying out the output of the success, and then our audience is watching this, being like, well, "Okay, how do we do that? Please help me with please help me with the first step to get on that path." So, is there any color that you can add there, and then I'll maybe throw back to Denis for the final word.
Yeah, I think one of the things is, one, know your objectives. Right? Understand what you're trying to achieve, in the different work processes you're looking for. Look at the tools you need to make it happen. Get the feedback from your staff, because they're going to help guide the ideal kind of pain points. We talk about pain points, right? And it's a good point to raise there. Where are they? Where are you going to get tripped up along the way here? And if they're living it every day, they can identify those and come up, not only identify, but come up with solutions. And then, what that feedback you do get implemented. Right, and so be able to put it into action. And one of the key things I can't emphasize enough is find opportunities to give employees the flexibility and the autonomy within these models. It's going to boost their satisfaction. It's going to boost their well-being. It's going to boost their performance as they're working on. And it's, of course, going to boost their commitment to whatever plan you're going to put in. If you get that feedback in any change management process, from the people involved, they become more committed. If you give them autonomy and flexibility and you empower them, they become so much more committed to making the process work and using the tools effectively. And I think that's some really key things to keep in mind.
And again, rebuilding some of that trust. Just shout out because Miranda's sending me some stuff from the audience watching. People are really liking the toothpaste isn't going back in the tube stuff. We're like every version of that analogy, everyone's like, yes, it's not going back. And then Ian Hartland, a senior project manager, noted that async and remote are not always the same thing. So that's important to keep in mind when you're playing this out. But Denis, I wanted to give you the opportunity because you were something that John was saying was resonating.
Yeah. So one thing is when you build your plan, right? So your strategy or your policy around hybrid work, right? So you need to consider like what you mentioned, right? So based on the individually or the need of each of the team, but also there's a cultural aspect to that, right? Like when you look a worldwide organization, so it will be an aspect of based on the region or the country. So will be different, I would say, model that need to be deployed based on that, right? Or the reality of each of the region or country.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So,
like we're just seeing this right now. Both BC and Ontario have made changes towards when it comes to hiring information that you can share related to salaries and like AI. Like, yes, that's a whole other live stream conversation that we might have. But we're also getting into the I guess the closing thoughts here. Somehow we've been talking for 58 minutes and we've touched upon maybe like 60% of what we had in terms of the conversation. So I think we're starting to get to what business should keep top of mind, and I'm hearing maybe flexibility all the way down. But Michael, I want to give you a chance to get in here, and then we'll maybe be like any shout outs in terms of call to action links, reference materials, reports where people should be going for more of this. But I wanted to see, is there anything else that the group here hasn't mentioned that you think that businesses should be keeping top of mind?
I think for me, it's been a great opportunity to learn from Denis and from yourself and from John. And, you know, the takeaway is ask your people within your company and your organization. They have all of the knowledge. Let them guide you, and you will come out with a great plan. I think it's paramount.
Yeah, I appreciate you for whatever reason, sort of saying that you learned something from me today, but it's very kind of you. No, but and maybe we'll go to like call to action and stuff here. I think maybe the one thing that stands out to me is that we have talked, and again we've got technology companies here and university professors, and then media companies here. Obviously technology is driving this circumstance, but we are very much focused on the management considerations, the human considerations, the communication considerations. Like the tech is enabling this stuff if you're using it right. Denis, anything that you would want people to go to check out, something that you're reading, anything maybe like Intel's producing that you want to send people to as a call to action?
Two things. I would say first call to action, I would say go on the web and look for Intel hybrid work. So you'll see all our policies and how we're implementing and so you get a lot of content around
So
that.
they don't just have to crib it from you on the live stream.
No, exactly. They can get it and they get all the details and it's going to say way more nicely than I said it, right? So, and the other thing, which is not a call to action, but I really want to leave with a positive note, right? So like I say, I've been with Intel 24 years and I pretty much built my career from my basement in Montreal. So, and I was able to go through, like I said, multiple roles and be where I am today. So you can have a great career working remote or hybrid, but you proactively need to manage it and really do things that we take for granted when you're working in an office.
As someone who started out of his basement in Ottawa, that resonates with me very personally. I'm happy to second that information, but also truly hear Denis when he's saying you have to take responsibility for that. Don't wait and watch and see how it plays out. Take ownership, and it'll accelerate things so much more. John, we have an interview with you on BetaKit, so that's a pretty easy call to action that we'll drop in the links on this and when we do the wrap up. But I'm assuming you have some other policy driven things or places you want to shout out. So go nuts, sir. Hit us with the URLs.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have specific URLs. I will say that there's a lot of great research that's going on out there. Don't be afraid to look at a lot of the universities like University of Toronto and other big universities around the world who have researchers like myself doing work on this. This is what we think about quite a bit of the time. There's great work coming out of Stanford, out of Harvard, out of our school, other Canadian institutions as well, that really, where people are really pushing to find out, well, how do we work better? And I think that's really the goal for all organizations and all employees. Kind of my call to action is let's keep looking for ways to work better. To our tech partners that are sitting at the table there and out and listening, develop these new technologies, push these new technologies that are going to let us work better, let us work safer, smarter, and be able to develop the kind of workplaces and work environments and work modes in the future that are going to make us be not just productive but healthy and enjoy our jobs and have meaning out of our jobs.
Yeah. And again, if this is the first time that you've met a policy wonk like John, it's not that bad. It's really easy to engage. He says things in human language that everyone can understand. There's some value you can get from there. I strongly suggest check out the interview that we did with him. I strongly suggest if you're just watching this to check out the wrap up in case there are any additional reference links that we can drive in here. Anything from the soft choice perspective that you want to shout out in terms of a call to action or?
We're always here to help.
Okay, awesome. You schedule a Thursday meeting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome.
Tell me where. I'll show up.
From our end, if you want to learn more about this, when we do the wrap up on BetaKit.com, we will be stuffing that with links. Some of the information mentioned here. Any other questions that we get, if you're watching this VOD, don't worry. We have planned for an asynchronous environment. Put your question or comment in there. We'll get it included. We'll get these experts responding to that. I just feel like we started clearing our throats about this topic. We could go for another hour, but some of us have a dinner to get to, so we got to close this off. So we're going to see you on the next one. Until then, I am Douglas Soltys. BetaKit out. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you to all the panelists in person and remote, as needed, as we allow, for participating in this conversation. I really want to see more businesses leaning into this stuff in 2024 and embracing a plan for this, because it's the toothpaste is not going back into the tube, folks. See you on the next one.
Thanks, everyone. Be well.